What if the rapid developments in Kupyansk, the enigmatic deployment of new Russian weaponry, and the colossal €200 billion financial maneuver in Brussels are not isolated incidents, but tightly woven threads in a single, covert narrative? Imagine for a moment that these events are chess moves in a global game, each piece advancing or retreating according to strategies known only to a select few. The implications of such coordination are staggering, not only for Ukraine or Russia, but for every citizen, investor, and government on the planet. While the official channels maintain a calculated silence, frontline sources have emerged with revelations that threaten to topple the accepted narrative about Kupyansk. This crisis is no longer a distant possibility or a mere threat lurking on the horizon. Russian forces are already operating within the city's limits. The previous denials, so confidently issued by authorities and echoed by the media, are now crumbling under the weight of undeniable evidence. Even the most steadfast Ukrainian defenders, those who had publicly vowed Kupyansk would never fall, have been forced into reluctant admissions, a quiet acknowledgement that the city's fate has shifted dramatically. A pivotal moment arrived when Parliament member Mariana Bezula inadvertently breached official protocol. In just a handful of words, she pierced the carefully maintained façade of governmental messaging, confirming what local rumors and fragmented leaks had long suggested. The mainstream story began to unravel, each new detail eroding the public's trust in the narrative they had been offered. For many, it brought echoes of past conflicts where truth emerged only through slips and whispers, such as the initial stages of the Soviet incursion into Afghanistan in the late 1970s or the fall of Saigon in 1975, when the reality of defeat outpaced the official announcements. As Kupyansk's fate teeters on a knife edge, a new and potentially even more destabilizing danger is brewing far to the west, in the stately corridors of Brussels. European Union officials are preparing to release frozen Russian assets worth an astronomical €200 billion. This is not just a bureaucratic maneuver. It is a gambit with the potential to trigger a financial earthquake across global markets. Veteran economists, recalling the ripples caused by the Asian financial crisis of 1997 or the collapse of Lehman Brothers in 2008, warn that the consequences may spiral far beyond anyone's ability to contain or predict. Is it possible that these crises are merely coincidental? Or are they the calculated moves of competing powers in a new era of high-stakes global rivalry? The convergence of military action, economic pressure, and political intrigue is unmistakable. Each move is reverberating across continents, drawing in actors from Beijing to Riyadh, from Washington to Berlin. The true peril lies in the failure to recognize the connections, the risk that we will overlook who is truly orchestrating events, what is at stake for our economies, and how these shifts could imperil the safety of ordinary people everywhere. Let us dissect the series of events that just unfolded in Kupyansk, and unravel why their impact will reach far beyond the city's battered streets. To grasp the full magnitude of this seismic shift, we must first lay bare the reality of what transpired on the ground. Only by understanding these details can we comprehend the broader stakes in play, a lesson history has taught repeatedly, from the trenches of Verdun to the ruins of Grozny. Why did the official version of Kupyansk's fate collapse so abruptly? The unraveling began with the inadvertent words of a Ukrainian parliamentarian, words that were never intended for public consumption. In the briefest moment, the carefully constructed narrative fell apart, and what had been closely guarded secrets suddenly became the stuff of headlines. This recalls the moment during the Cuban Missile Crisis when a single U-2 photograph over Cuba forced an immediate and public reckoning with the truth. The reality is now unavoidable. Russian troops are not merely menacing the city's outskirts or probing its defenses. They are actively operating inside Kupyansk itself. Even those who, only a day prior, had insisted on the city's invulnerability, are now compelled to acknowledge that the city is, at least for now, lost. This public concession marks a watershed moment, not only in military terms, but also in the narrative that has been presented both to the Ukrainian population and the international community. Panic has begun to seep into the highest ranks of Ukraine's leadership. The era of confident, upbeat briefings has ended. Behind closed doors, officials are scrambling to produce explanations as their previous assurances are rendered obsolete. This is more than a tactical setback. It is the disintegration of the illusion that anyone, on either side, fully controls the direction of this war. In a similar vein, the United States' sudden withdrawal from Afghanistan in 2021 revealed the vulnerability of authorities when events outpaced their ability to spin them. The anxiety does not stop at Ukraine's borders. Western analysts, who had previously dismissed rumors of new Russian weaponry as bluster, are now deeply unsettled. A single ambiguous sentence from the Kremlin has silenced even the most vocal skeptics. What is this weapon, and why was it kept secret, even from Moscow's closest allies? The experts do not pretend to know, but their unease is unmistakable. The specter of a game-changing technology, reminiscent of the introduction of the tank in World War I or the atomic bomb in World War II, has injected a new level of uncertainty into the conflict. Meanwhile, dispatches from the front lines and independent observers tell a story of major change. Eyewitnesses describe Russian vehicles moving through neighborhoods that had seen no military presence in years. Seasoned military specialists, who once voiced cautious optimism, now sound the alarm as new evidence pours in by the hour. The previous equilibrium has vanished, replaced by a rapidly shifting balance of power. This is reminiscent of the German Blitzkrieg in 1940, when the speed and scale of the offensive stunned both allies and adversaries alike. The consequences of misunderstanding these shifts are enormous. Policymakers, financiers, and ordinary citizens may be making decisions based on assumptions that are already obsolete, swept away by the accelerating pace of events. In 2008, for example, many investors ignored early warning signs of the impending financial crisis, clinging to old models until it was far too late. Yet the deeper crisis is unfolding not only on the streets of Kupyansk, but also in the halls of power. Decisions made in a state of panic, rather than careful deliberation, can reshape not just this war, but the entire global order. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in 1914, made without a full appreciation of the consequences, triggered a cascade of events that plunged the world into war. But Kupyansk is only one theater in a far larger contest. As leaders in Brussels strive to contain the economic aftershocks, the strain is beginning to fracture long-standing alliances. The unity of the West, once taken for granted, is now showing visible fissures. What happens when every lever of control snaps, and a new generation of weaponry turns certainty into chaos? The 20th century offers many examples. The introduction of nuclear weapons, the emergence of cyber warfare, and the role of economic sanctions as tools of statecraft all have repeatedly upended strategic calculations. Inside Ukraine, a concealed disaster is unfolding. The official narrative projects unwavering strength, but beneath it lies growing turmoil, waves of desertions, frantic attempts to restore order, and crumbling morale. In Kupyansk and beyond, commanders are desperately trying to stitch together stories that even their own troops struggle to accept. The phenomenon mirrors the later years of the Vietnam War, when U.S. military leaders sought to project progress while the reality on the ground was increasingly dire. Western analysts who only months ago were confident in Ukraine's prospects are now openly contemplating bleaker scenarios. Resources have been stretched to the breaking point, and the possibility of outright victory has all but disappeared. In London, Berlin, and Washington, advocates for a Ukrainian resurgence now quietly discuss the likelihood of a protracted stalemate. Negotiations, once dismissed out of hand, are being reconsidered as the only viable exit. The West's illusion of control is evaporating, a pattern seen in conflicts from Korea to Syria, where initial optimism gave way to the harsh calculus of reality. Into this strategic vacuum, Moscow sends a chilling message: the imminent deployment of a weapon that could rewrite the rules of the battlefield. The rumored Burevestnik cruise missile is unmanned, nuclear-capable, and reportedly able to remain airborne for days on end. Even the mere suggestion of such a capability has sent shockwaves through Western capitals. The threat is not just material, but psychological. a reminder that the old playbook for deterrence may no longer apply. This is comparable to the shock felt in 1949 when the Soviet Union detonated its first atomic bomb, ending the United States' monopoly on nuclear weapons and ushering in a new era of uncertainty. Far from the mud and smoke of the front lines, another power is stirring. Chinese authorities, previously content to observe from the sidelines, are now signaling a subtle but unmistakable alignment with Moscow's logic. Official statements remain carefully worded, but gestures, trade policies, and diplomatic initiatives reveal a quiet encouragement of Russia's actions and a warning to Western leaders against further escalation. Historical parallels abound. During the Cold War, shifting allegiances between Beijing and Moscow, or between Washington and Tokyo, repeatedly altered the balance of power. On the ground, the consequences are immediate and raw. Ukrainian battalions, exhausted and outgunned, are now fighting as much against the collapse of their own command structure as against their adversaries. Witnesses report units disintegrating, officers disappearing, and a chain of authority corroded by doubt. The myth of unbreakable resistance is being replaced with a grimmer reality. The West is watching, and concern is mounting. This recalls the collapse of the French army in 1940, when morale and leadership failures led to a rapid and unexpected defeat. To ignore these warning signs is to risk losing any grip on the emerging landscape of warfare and deterrence. This is not merely a military or political shift. It is a foundational transformation, a reordering of global power that will echo for generations. The collapse of the Ottoman Empire in the early 20th century, for example, redrew borders and altered the political destinies of entire regions. As front lines buckle and new weapons emerge, the next critical act will unfold not in Ukraine's battered fields, but in the marbled halls of Brussels. Here, a different kind of explosion is being prepared, one that could send shockwaves through the core of the world's financial system. In the corridors of Brussels, teams of financial strategists are working late into the night, preparing measures as disruptive as any weapon. Their decisions could redraw the fault lines of international finance, triggering aftershocks that no one is fully prepared to handle. The decision to weaponize almost 200 billion euros in frozen Russian assets, channeling the proceeds directly to Ukraine, is unprecedented. On the surface, it is a bold gesture of support. In reality, it is a wager with consequences that could reverberate for decades. The deeper threat lies in the erosion of trust. For decades, governments and major investors, in China, the Middle East, and Asia, have relied on Western banks to shield their reserves from political risk. The foundation of global finance has been built on the belief that contracts and property rights are sacrosanct, and that assets deposited in Western institutions are safe from arbitrary seizure. Now, with this single move, that bedrock of trust is being chipped away. If 200 billion euros can be seized today, whose assets are safe tomorrow? The message to the world is unmistakable. Financial power can become a weapon overnight, and no one is immune. Quick legal justifications and complex financial maneuvers may provide temporary cover, but they undermine the very principles upon which international finance is built. Central banks and sovereign wealth funds across the globe are asking themselves urgent questions. Should we begin shifting our reserves out of euro and dollar-denominated assets? Should we diversify into gold, commodities, or alternative currencies before we are similarly targeted? In the 1970s, similar fears triggered a massive move into gold as faith in the United States dollar wavered. This is not merely about Russia or Ukraine. A new precedent is being set. Powerful blocs can seize their rivals' assets during times of conflict. If this becomes routine, the perceived safety of any country's reserves is called into question, and the stability of the entire international financial system is threatened. The potential fallout is immense. Investors may rush to move their money, leading to sudden devaluations of major currencies, while trade and investment flows freeze as trust evaporates. The Asian financial crisis of the late 1990s offers a cautionary tale. Panic and rapid capital flight can quickly spiral out of control, plunging entire economies into recession. Why is the West willing to take such a risk? The answer is desperation. Traditional tools, sanctions, diplomatic pressure, and military aid have failed to yield decisive results. These new financial tactics are not a display of control, they are an admission of crisis. Instead of projecting strength, Western institutions are revealing their anxiety and their willingness to improvise in the face of mounting challenges. The use of currency as a weapon is not new, but its scale and the actors involved today recall the financial warfare of World War I, when Britain's blockade and control over global finance starved Germany's war machine. At stake is more than just the West's dominance of the financial system. It is the world's trust in the rules that underpin the global economy, the belief that savings, investments, and the authority of states themselves rest on solid ground. If that trust collapses, the consequences could be catastrophic. A €200 billion experiment may cost the world far more than Brussels ever imagined, unleashing volatility not seen since the Great Depression. As the lines between financial warfare and military conflict blur, the world is entering uncharted territory. The old distinctions between peace and war are fading, replaced by a landscape where economic, technological, and informational tools are wielded as weapons. The concept of hybrid warfare, first articulated by analysts in the early 21st century, is no longer theoretical. It is the reality of our times. Yet, even as financial norms are shattered in Brussels, Kupyansk is becoming a crucible for the New World Order. Both fronts, military and economic, demonstrate how rapidly the structures that defined the post-Cold War era are unraveling. The lessons of history repeat: the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, the end of Bretton Woods in 1971, the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989. All were moments when the rules suddenly changed, catching many unprepared. How can individuals defend their future when the rules that once seemed unshakable are dissolving, and alliances that provided security are splintering? The world's foundations, political, economic, and social, are shifting beneath our feet, often faster than we can comprehend. In such times, adaptation is not a luxury, but a necessity. First, it is vital to accept that control is slipping from the hands of traditional power centers. The guarantees of yesterday, the stability of the dollar, the reliability of alliances, the predictability of markets, offer no assurance today. Those who cling to official stories risk being blindsided as reality veers away from the headlines. This was evident during the oil shocks of the 1970s, when governments reassured citizens even as prices soared and economies faltered. Diversification is no longer just a prudent strategy. It is a survival imperative. Spread your savings across multiple types of assets, currencies, and jurisdictions. Consider the example of families in Argentina who, facing repeated currency collapses over the past century, often hold assets in dollars, euros, real estate, and even cryptocurrencies as a hedge against uncertainty. Do not accept any advice at face value, even from trusted sources. In times like these, misinformation and propaganda abound, and yesterday's wisdom may become today's trap. Equally important is the need to monitor signals not only from Western capitals, but also from rising powers in the East. China is quietly setting its own agenda, adjusting its trade routes, promoting the yuan in international transactions, and deepening ties with new partners. Those who learn to interpret these subtle shifts will be far better prepared for the coming era. The rise of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank and the Belt and Road Initiative are just two examples of how Beijing is asserting influence in ways that bypass traditional Western institutions. Power today is measured in more than just tanks and warships. It flows through stock exchanges, central banks, supply chains, and information networks. Sanctions, currency moves, and cyber campaigns are now as critical as missiles and armies. The United States' ability to impose financial sanctions on adversaries has been a cornerstone of its power since the Second World War. But that leverage is now being challenged as rivals seek alternatives. Trust, once broken on the world stage, is difficult to restore. This crisis is not just about disputed territory or military skirmishes. It is about a profound collapse of trust between governments, institutions, and ordinary people. That breach reverberates everywhere, affecting investments, career prospects, and personal security. The banking crises of the early 2010s in Cyprus and Greece, which saw depositors' savings seized or frozen overnight, are stark reminders of how quickly trust can evaporate. To ignore these shifts is to accept the risk of sudden, sweeping losses. The world is not just changing, it is being deliberately reshaped by those who see the new rules and adapt first. The winners will be those who recognize the patterns early and act accordingly, much as investors who exited the dot-com bubble in the late 1990s preserved their fortunes while others suffered catastrophic losses. Kupyansk and Brussels are more than just headlines. They are warning signs, each move on the ground or in the markets, a clue to where the new world order is being forged. History is replete with such signals, from the fall of Constantinople to the dawn of the Internet age, and those who heed them gain a decisive advantage. You have just glimpsed the new tectonic plates beneath the surface of global affairs. The question is, what will you do now? Will you wait for official narratives to catch up? Or will you interpret the signals for yourself? The clashes in Kupyansk, the unveiling of Russian weapons, and the financial shocks emanating from Brussels are not random, disconnected events. Together, they sketch the outline of a global order under siege, where old certainties are crumbling and new powers are asserting themselves with growing confidence. If you are still waiting for the official story to bring clarity, you may already be behind the curve. Narratives designed to comfort or distract are disintegrating as hard facts force their way to the surface, both in public view and in private deliberations. The systemic crisis is no longer an abstract theory. It is unfolding in real time, with the principal actors dropping their masks and revealing the stakes for all to see. This crisis is not limited to shifting borders or distant capitals. The cost of passivity, or of holding on to comfortable but outdated explanations, is perilously high. What is truly at stake is your ability to anticipate shocks, to your finances, your career, and your expectations for the future. The story of those who ignored the warning signs before the global pandemic in 2020 is a sobering illustration of the risks of inaction. We stand at an extraordinary juncture. The price of inaction is the loss of your chance to prepare for, or even shape, the next phase. A phase that is advancing whether or not you are ready. The world as you have known it is being reconfigured. Those who recognize this early will possess a critical edge in the years ahead. So, how should you interpret these signals? Are you paying attention to the new nuances in official language, or the sudden silence from those who once spoke with confidence? Are you connecting the dots between battlefield developments and quiet decisions in financial capitals? The call to action is both clear and urgent. Reflect, question, and engage. Share your observations in the comments below. Which patterns do you see emerging, and how do you plan to adapt? Because if you remain a mere spectator, you risk being overtaken by events. The time to act, to reassess old alliances, and to challenge your assumptions is now. The world is moving forward, and only those who read the signals will thrive in what comes next.